Hello and welcome to the Rocksmith dev stream here on YouTube. I am your host and community developer, Douglas Lilly. I welcome you to our stream, our second stream on YouTube. Thank you again, everyone who's joining us for the first time, who's coming over, joining us from our Twitch stream. Really glad to have you all here. If it is your first time, just let you know what we like to do here. We like to talk about music. Today we're going to be investigating notation through the ages. So if you want to nerd out with us, I'm really excited about talking about music notation from the past few hundred years. Hopefully you're excited to listen to it. To do that, we have Dr. Margaret Jones, who will be joining us very, very soon. If you've watched our stream in the past, you may have seen her when we talked about protest music in the past. And we also have a guest who will be playing some pre-recorded music a little bit down the line, and we have a segment from Greg Studley. If you're a rhythm player or if you play rhythm ever and you want to really kind of up your game with that, he's going to go over what you can do with triads and that. So that's all coming down the line. We are still working on our giveaways situation. Our friends at Ernie Ball are still helping us with some prizes, but we're working on how we can best get those to you on this new platform. So that's going to have to wait a little bit longer, but we will have some song pack giveaways further on in the stream. So again, thank you for being here. Really excited to have you, and especially excited to have Dr. Margaret Jones with us right now. Maybe now-ish.
Now-ish.
Welcome. Welcome, Marge. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, yeah, I'm ready to nerd out. So you've prepared something.
I have prepared something. We can kind of pretend like we're like all in a college class for like a little minute, and I'll do a little slideshow presentation.
And want to let everybody know
professor.
before we get too far into it, I'm hoping and I'm sure people will have questions in the chat. If you do have questions, make sure you at UB Jurassic, that is Brian Turner. He is our community manager in North Carolina. He can get your questions from the chat to us, and we can talk about those after Marge shows what she has brought. So please, without any further
All right. All right. Going back to the, are we top of the slide? Okay. All right, everybody.
Sorry about
that. No worries. Sorry for all the listeners at home. So there are 4 elements that music notation generally deals with. So first of all, there's pitch, like what are the notes? Second of all, how long the note lasts, the duration of the note, the intensity of the note, like so how loud or soft it is, and then the sound quality or the timbre of the notes. So sometimes you won't, like that last category, you won't see as much. But you can still sometimes get directions to play maybe closer to the neck or closer to the bridge on a guitar. And if you've never experimented with that, I encourage you to do so, because you get a bunch of different sound qualities, even on the same instrument, by playing at different positions along the string. So those are like some of the fundamental things that we write down. And even when you go to the earliest sources of music, written music, so like when we're talking about this, we're sort of talking about Western music. So let's not neglect the fact that, there are like classical Indian music notation systems, probably music notation systems all around the world that go back as far, if not further, than what we're talking about today. But the earliest notation systems that we see in like Europe and Western Asia that become, classical music and the ways that music is often notated today. The earliest we can see is the 14th century BCE. That's Greek or Sumerian cuneiform tablets, where like if you haven't seen cuneiform writing before, it's like these clay tablets with like these little impressed like conical triangular shapes in them. There was a form of music notation there. And then the next most recent is Greek notation, which is like 750 to 400 BCE, which has basically it's assigning pitches to the syllables of a song that you'd be singing. So you don't really get rhythm, but you get, what the pitches are that corresponds to parts of the words. If we go on to the next slide, we start to see where music and politics collide. So if any of you are familiar with like European history, if you know, like during the late 700s into the 800s, Charlemagne, Holy Roman Empire, Charles I, sought to unify his empire, which was most of Europe and part of Eastern Asia, under the Holy Roman Empire. I think we went one slide too far. Let's go back to the one with the medieval dudes writing stuff down. So there's this wonderful story. So like if you were, around and if you were paying attention to like some of the musical trends in the late 90s, you probably knew about like Anonymous 4, the Gregorian chant singers that became this huge trend. That's Gregorian chant as we understand it today. And there's this myth that's sort of like Pope Gregory invented it, therefore it is called Gregorian chant. That's not true. That is a historical misnomer. We know for a fact that this was Charlemagne trying to unify his empire by getting us all to sing the same psalms and hymns, using a uniform kind of music notation. So this picture that you're looking at right now is the myth of Pope Gregory dictating these psalms, and you can see there's a little dove on his shoulder that is like dictating, like mouthpiece of God to Pope Gregory, and he is telling his scribe what to write down, what these psalms are, and he has like this divine inspiration for what music notation is supposed to be. We know as historians that's actually Charlemagne dictating to Albinus of York in like the late 700s that he wanted some kind of system to write things down. So when people went to far-flung outer bands of the Holy Roman Empire, they knew how to sing the songs so that they could all worship in a uniform way and unify the Holy Roman Empire. This has repercussions that last for centuries after that. So if we go on to the next slide, we can see what kind of goes on from there. So I don't expect slide 3. If you're looking at slide 3, you'll see, like, I don't expect anybody to read like 12th century Latin. I don't read 12th century Latin, but if you see the squiggles above the words, those are basically like these little like mnemonic like memory aids for how the tune's supposed to go. So it's like semi-oral tradition, semi-written tradition. You have this manuscript that kind of tells you the arc of what the melody is like. So you kind of have like these memory guides of how to sing something, but you still have to know how it goes, and you still have to know what the words are so you can line it up with what you're seeing in this manuscript. So this is from the St. Gall manuscript. It was penned sometime before the year 920. So if we go into the script, the slide after that, we can see where it starts to actually look like notation that you might see today. So slide 4 is, this is from like the 1100s. And this is one of the many, well, actually, no, this is actually a secular song. So one of the cool things about medieval music, or one of the weird things about medieval music, is that if you think about how much it must cost to make a book, like books in the Middle Ages were made out of sheepskin. Like vellum is like treated sheepskin. So there was no paper. Like if you wanted to make a book, think about how many sheep had to donate their lives to make a book. You didn't waste the vellum on trivial things most of the time. So most of the books that survive from this time period are religious books, or like books of like laws passed by the kings of whatever region they were in. But this one is fun because it's actually a secular song, which means a non-religious song. And it's basically just like a summer ritual. It's called Summerize. It's one of the earliest examples of secular music, basically like a pop song, like we think about today. And it's just about like the things that young people do in the late spring when they're feeling happy and in love with each other and all of that. So I think an important takeaway from this is that, you know, even in the Middle Ages, like people had a sense of humor. People had like lighthearted songs, just most of them didn't get written down because most of it was very serious religious stuff. If we move on to the next slide, this is about as over the top as this early notation gets. So this is from the Chantilly manuscript. This is a French manuscript from the 1200s, the late 1200s. And you can kind of see how overkill it gets. This is music for the eyes. So you have all the information about duration, pitch, you know, what notes you play and when. You can see that some of the notes are color coded. That actually tells you like different time signatures. And if we can, you know, like let's think about, you know, Rocksmith. We've seen music color coded in perhaps not this way, but in other ways. Like color coding is a very useful way to kind of keep track of where we are in the music. In this instance, it's showing us like different durations of notes. But the circular piece in particular is fun because it is a round. So you're meant to sing it over and over and over again. So the music just connects where it leaves off. And then you just sing it over and over and over again. But the time signature changes, so it gets faster, progressively faster every time you repeat it. So
how is that, if you don't mind me interrupting,
yeah,
how is that
please.
indicated on the slide?
So if you look right under, so these are both pieces by a composer named Baud Codier. So you can see his name kind of written in really funny, like late medieval script at the top. If you look right underneath that, you'll see there's like a little circle and then a little half circle. And then beneath that, there's like another like half circle with a line through it.
Okay.
That's our time signature. So if you've ever looked at time signatures in like modern notation, you notice there's like the cut time where there's like a C with the slash through it. Mm-hmm. That's actually a holdover from medieval notation.
Okay.
That tells you that like everything that you're doing, cut it in half and play it twice as fast. So you have like this inner circle that's like the bass line and the outer circle that's the melody. And the time signatures change at different rates for this. So like it's designed so that, you know, as you speed things up, they still line up, but they sound different against each other. So it's this whole like puzzle music that you have to assemble by figuring out what the ratios are between the outer circle and the inner circle.
Oh, okay. So you get to do fun on the spot math. Is your
yeah?
I guess you're always doing fun on the spot math when you're reading notation, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I don't mean that to sound like overwhelming. Like, it's certainly overwhelming for us to look at this, and I feel overwhelmed looking at it. Like, how do you do the math on this? But like, think about the ways that you do math with modern music. Like, it's not like we aren't doing these kind of computations in our heads when we're thinking about music that we play every day. It's just that this is what people were used to when they were looking at it back in like the 1200s. So, it, or the way that you might like make some sort of like musical gift for a friend where like they have to kind of figure it out. It's not necessarily like all the music that everybody was looking at then was like this, but this is like the extreme example.
Yeah. So this might be a situation where, since these books would be so very precious, as you're giving them to people, letting people use them, this might help it last longer, because you can't just necessarily just look at it and play the tune. You have to work at it. You have to kind of develop the piece as you go.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll see another example of that a few slides later. So let's keep it going, because I've got a lot of things I want to show.
Okay, sorry.
No. Please ask questions. I just know that like I want to keep things on schedule so I don't screw you up. So if we move on to like the tablature slide number 6, like this is just some information. So like tablature, on the other hand, this is probably like, if you've played Rocksmith, this is the most familiar to like the note way, what you're used to seeing in game. Notation that's specific to an instrument. It shows you like the strings and the frets. It uses alternative symbols like letters and numbers to tell you basically where to put your hands on the instrument, in addition to any information that you might have about like what the pitches are and how long you play them. It's not like that information isn't there. It's just expressed in a different way. But it's not limited to fretted instruments, so like the guitar or the bass or maybe like the ukulele or something like that. If we go on to slide number 7, I can show you an example from the Robertsbridge Codex, which is from the 14th century, around the year 1325. And this one, it's a little blurry, and I apologize for that. It's a little hard to see, but you'll see what kind of looks like the notation that we saw in the previous example, where they're like the note shapes, but they're like the little diamond-shaped heads instead of like the round ones that you have in modern notation. But if you look closely underneath it, you'll see that there are letters written in underneath it, and that is for the foot pedals. So if you've ever seen like the big church organs, you know that like it, just like a piano, you have your right hand and your left hand that you play the keyboards with, but then there's an additional keyboard on the floor that you play with your feet. So the letters there are telling you what to play with your feet. So rather than like writing out like 3 different staves, each one its own hand and then the feet, they just wrote the letters in underneath to save paper. So like, in a lot of these instances, there's like this shorthand that kind of, if you're in the know, you know how to read it. But if you're looking at it, expecting it to be like a modern printed edition of a book, it's not going to look like you expect. And, for the record, like Bach, like the Johann Sebastian Bach that everyone like holds up, he did this. Like there's stuff in his handwriting that has these letters underneath it. So it's not like this is like cheating or, cutting corners. It's just like, I have this much paper.
Efficiency. It's all about getting the most information in the smallest amount of space.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to like what it actually looks like over the years for fretted instruments. So if we're on slide number 8, you can see a couple different versions of this, and this is what starts to look a little more familiar. So there's an example that uses letters on the left-hand side of the screen, and then there's an example that uses numbers on the right-hand side. And sometimes the left-hand side is called French tablature, and the right-hand side is called Italian. That's mostly just, where these different systems were used most prevalently in the 15th and 16th centuries. They both kind of work the same way that modern tablature does, where you'll see, certain letters mean certain things. Basically, like it's like frets 1 through whatever. It's letters A through whatever. And then with the Italian tablature, that basically works like modern tablature does, except the strings are in the opposite order. So the low E is at the top, the high E is at the bottom. Good luck if you're used to reading modern tablature, reading everything upside down. But that's basically how it worked. And you can kind of see in this example where there's like a little like virtuosic passage at the final system, where like it's all of these like single notes in a row. Yeah, that's where it's the exact opposite where you'd like to see it if you're used to reading modern tablature.
So was I'm gonna butt in for another moment, ask a question. So with modern tablature, where you do traditionally have the low E at the bottom of the staff, or yeah, we'll call it a staff. I assume that's a transition that happened once we sort of in Western notation solidified things, and we had the lower tones at the bottom, so that the tablature that we know now feels more and reads more like just standard Western notation.
Yeah, so like the word tablature comes from like the word tabulatura, which basically just means table, like not like kitchen table, but like a grid table, like a chart. So all of these are just grids that show you where your fingers are in relationship to the frets and the strings. So in any of these systems, like you were looking at, someone's best effort at showing you where to put your hands on the instrument. It does get codified, especially as you're going into like the 17th century, so like the 1600s onwards. Like the earliest examples of tablature are like the 14th century, like 1300s. But it wasn't until music printing really took off in like the 16th century, 1500s, that it became more codified. And that's where you have the two systems. There's the French system and the Italian system, as they're called, but like it wasn't just French or Italian speaking places that used them. But yeah, as time goes on, having the lowest strings the same places that it would be on like staff notation starts to solidify, and you see more and more like the lowest string is the lowest line. That solidifies probably in like the 1700s, but you'll see this stuff. And if we'll take a little side trip on slide number 9. Slide number 9. This is an example of that Italian notation that's like upside down to our idea of what's normal. But my favorite thing about this, and this is going back to what we were talking about before with like the visual music, making it so that you're more invested in saving it. In the preface, the person that wrote the book actually says that, and I quote, "Considering that many divine works have been lost through the ignorance of their owners, and wishing that this quasi-divine book I have written should perpetually be preserved, have decided to ornament it with such noble pictures that if it comes in the hands of one who is lacking such understanding, he will preserve it for the beauty of the pictures."
Oh, wow.
So it's sort of like acknowledging like, oh, some idiot might inherit this book and want to use it to like pack bullets in their musket or something, but they'll look at the pictures and be like, oh, this is great, so I want to keep this.
This is actually worth something. Yeah. This isn't just a bunch of numbers. This is actually this is worth. Okay.
Like, look, there's a cheetah on it and some cherubs. Yeah, there's and some bunny rabbits. Let's keep it. But the other thing I really love about it is that all of the note durations are color coded. So if you look at like how like the 8th notes, the 16th notes, and like the, I guess, 32nd notes, as we'd call them today, like they're all different colors, which makes it a lot easier to see. Sort of like how the strings are color coded in Rocksmith. Like you can just tell at a glance what you're supposed to be doing, because all of the notes are different colors. And like that's one of the things where it kind of goes away for a long time, because with printing, especially the printing technology in like the 16th and 17th centuries, like every color was its own. They had to run it through the press again. Mm-hmm. But this is a manuscript, so you can make anything whatever color you want because you're just painting it. So it was sort of one of the last examples of that for a couple centuries before printing technology caught up and you could print things in many, many colors.
And is it safe to assume with these manuscripts, anyone who either wrote these manuscripts or had them written, would they have their own styles? Would they have their own sort of form of the notation? Because I assume it wasn't like wholly regulated. I assume there were certain habits, certain practices that were common, but everyone who sort of designed one of these might have their own way of communicating this information.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, like each of these systems was unified. Like if you were writing like numerical stuff or alphabetical stuff, you were basically adhering to the same kinds of things. Where it gets a little murky is that, you know, like lutes especially, the later it gets, they have, you know, like 10, 11, 12, 13 different strings.
Yeah.
And each of them are doubled. So there's actually more like, you know, 24, 25, 26 strings on the instrument. So those would all be sort of represented by just like random letters underneath the staff.
Okay.
They're just going to be like, oh yeah, play a low note. And like the way people represented that was a little less uniform. But the stuff that's on the lines, more or less, is, you know, consistent from place to place within like whether you're writing with numbers or writing with letters. But the weirdest thing is yet to come on the next slide. So if we go to slide number 10, this is one of my favorite books. It's this guy named Stefano Pizzori, who was this Italian guitar teacher from the early 17th century. And he does, like, in Italy, they did a lot more engraving than like movable type, which, fun fact, if you want to know why things are uppercase and lowercase, the uppercase was the capital letters. There were two cases of letters if you were using movable type, and the capital letters were the uppercase, and the lowercase numbers were in the lowercase. And that's just, you know, it was like their working system. They just pull letters from the two cases and use that to set their sentences. So again, holdover from the 16th century. But this one was engraved. This was not movable type. And the reason you can tell is that they take some liberties, especially like the little guy that's like pulling the staff off the page at the bottom. But this features a kind of notation that was only popular for about 50 years, and that's called alfabeto. And if you look at the next slide, so slide 11, basically all it is that every chord you can think of, or at least every chord they could think of in like the 17th century, was given a letter. So it doesn't correspond. It's like the A chord is not an A major chord. The A chord is a G chord. It's just called A. So you just learn what all of these chords are, and every time you saw one of those capital letters in the score, you just strum that chord. And so you'd have like the H chord and the M chord and the T chord and the X chord. And it's like, it has nothing to do with music theory. It has nothing to do with what notes are in the chord. It's just, you know, like this arbitrary system where each chord gets a name. You can see why it didn't persist, because there's not a whole lot of information that you can glean from that for like anything beyond that.
Right.
But that's not the only weird system that came out in the 17th century. If we go to slide number 12, this is another system from Luis Venegas de Henestrosa's Libro de Cifra Nueva, where basically like every note of the scale is just given a number. And you read it as if it's not tablature the way we think of it. Like it's just like, you know, like F is given 1, and then like G is given 2, and so on and so forth. So it's more in common with alfabeto than it is with like tablature as we know it. But you can apply it to any instrument, as you see here. And if you go on to the next slide, you can actually see how this is a very compact, useful system in its time. So this is a 40-part fugue that's written across 2 pages using 4 lines of music. Whoa. So, like, obviously, like there, you can see, like, if you look at the second line down underneath where it says like fuga a 40, like there's that little S with the dots. That's where, like, just like if you were doing row, row, row your boat, and you'd come in like, you know, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, row, row, row your boat gently. That's where you'd come in like that. Okay. But everybody does that until 40 different people are all doing stuff at
Doing
the
this
same
round.
time, and it lines up in this round, and you get this huge music, but it's like this very compact way to write it. So I think what I want to show with that is like there's no one way to write stuff down. There's no one way or another to show all the information. Even like things that are very efficient like this, you know, they have their drawbacks, because like how long do you hold these notes?
Right.
How do you tell? Like it just tells you when to play them. It doesn't tell you when to stop. It doesn't tell you like what the timbre is or anything like that. But if your primary concern is conserving paper, which at this point in time in like 1557 was the most expensive part of making a book, it's really economical and practical.
How did you tell what the rhythms were?
So you basically, you can see how like there's still bar lines in it, like you'd see in modern notation. See, like they're like the vertical lines.
Mm-hmm.
So each of those was like a standard unit of time. So you just line the notes up with where they happen in the measure. Much like in the note way, like as the notes are coming at you, you play them like as they hit the guitar neck. It's the same kind of idea, just two-dimensional. But that's like kind of the cool thing where like with Rocksmith, it's like sort of like the four-dimensional version of this, where you know, not only do you see where the frets are, where the strings are, what the notes are, but then you also see in real time like when you play stuff. Okay. So that kind of brings me to the end of my historical examples. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but
you're fine.
Okay. Like the point I want to make with this is that, you know, music notation is fluid. It does what it needs to do when it needs to do it, and people use it for different things over time. And, you know, Rocksmith is a part of that, where like the note way is a part of that. Not everything shows everything you need at any given time. Like staff notation shows something different than tablature shows, than, you know, the medieval notation shows. But in the moment, you get what you need from what you're looking at. So it's like different ways to think about music notation, and, you know, things that serve the needs of people throughout the ages.
With varying degrees of information sort of presented to the end user, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. So if we want to just move on to like a couple examples, we have a couple of slides left with that.
Let's get into it.
Yeah. So, you know, the next slide 14, is kind of what I was already just saying, where it was like, you know, there's this big history of music notation. It's not like it's set in stone. It's not like there's like one way to do this. And Rocksmith is a part of that. But if we look at, you know, slide 15, we'll get into a couple little like gameplay examples. There are things that you can do with like the Rocksmith noteway that you can't show with like two-dimensional notation. Things like vibrato or bends. So if we're like looking at the playthrough of like slide 15, where like there's this bend where like there's like a couple big bends at the beginning, and then it kind of like smooths out. You can't really, there's not a good way to show that in two-dimensional tablature, even like the most modern stuff.
Because like the lines would have to be so long in order to show where exactly those subdivisions are.
Yeah, but you can see that in real time with the noteway, which is like a really cool thing. Like that's something that is unique to the noteway that you don't see as much, if at all, in guitar tablature the way that you'd normally see it if you just pulled something off the internet. Or like if you go to slide 16, you know, it shows you exactly when to slide. It's not just like, oh, you slide between these notes. It's like you slide right now.
And this is the duration of the slide. Mm-hmm. And I think we're just let everybody in the chat know we are seeing the slides at the same time that you are, which is a little bit behind when Dr. Margaret is talking. So it's taking us a little bit to catch up. So apologies on that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the time slides right now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Like if you want to hold the note for a second and then slide, this is a way that you can show exactly when you do slide, which is like another cool thing where normally like in tablature, that would just be like a little slash between the two fret numbers. We'd just be like, oh yeah, you slide between these notes. And it's like, well, but when? Like, when do you do that? Sometimes you hold the first note for a while and then you slide. And people have been inventive about ways to express that, but it's so easy to see it in this notation. And then like the final one, time slides plus vibrato. It's like, okay, you land on a note and then you add vibrato. So it's like combining different techniques into one effect. So that would be the final slide 17.
I assume we're on it.
Yep, I see it now. Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay, so we're seeing it as you're seeing it. Yeah, but you kind of like slide up and slide down, and then eventually, like, it's like, okay, here's the little vibrato, but you can combine techniques that way, which is like what dynamic playing is. Like some of the things that you learn to do as you're becoming more proficient as a guitar player is that, okay, when you stick the landing on that note, you add a little vibrato to it. You make it sound to make it sound extra special. But that's not always obvious in like traditional tablature.
Right. Because we're looking at how much information you can pack into a space, and in a digital representation like this, that the slightest little bits of vibrato can be added. That can be information if you want it. Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret Jones.
My
did I cut you off?
No, not at all. That was my final point.
I do have some questions for you if you have some more time. So Jean had a couple of questions. One from some of the earlier pieces that you showed. Were there clef symbols at that point? Was there anything to denote treble clef, bass clef? Were those concepts that existed?
There were.
Okay.
If we go back to slide number 4, if we can go back to slide number 4. There is, if you look at the edge of the clef, so basically what happened between like the Franconian notation where it was just little squiggles above the words to where it actually looks like a staff. Basically there was like an in-between that I didn't talk about where they added a couple lines at a time before we got to like the 5 lines that you're used to seeing. So what happens is, like, as they're adding more lines, they're like, oh, we better like mark which ones they are. So they started by writing like a little C and then a little F. And those C's and F's, you can see the C on this one. That's basically kind of telling you like the line that C is on is C.
Oh, okay.
And over time, that gets elaborated and embellished and made much fancier, especially during the 19th century when everything was like super ornate. That basically becomes the tenor clef. Okay,
gotcha.
So anybody who's played viola or trombone and knows about like the tenor clef, it's like the weird, the one that like in music class, if you're only used to treble and bass, you're like, oh no, I have to
transpose. Yeah, that's where the transposition skills come in really handy.
Yep.
I never learned those. I
struggled with them. But the lines on that, when they come together, that points to C. So it's basically just this very ornate C.
Okay.
And then the treble clef, it's basically, you kind of have to look at it funny now to see it, but it's basically a capital G.
Oh,
and the loop-de bit, it goes around the G on the treble clef. And the bass clef is a very fancy F. If you think about the 2 dots on the bass clef as like the crossbars on the F.
Interesting. Very interesting.
They're all holdovers from like the 13th century.
Jean had another question about the Italian tablature. Wanted to know, why are there note heads above the stave, and what are those for? Were those the rhythmic markings
those
that you mentioned?
Yeah, so if we pull up like slide 9 again, all of those basically, like, you could imagine them kind of dropping down through the notes, just like modern notation. Whatever note is underneath them is whatever note value is floating above the staff.
All right. And Elisa Rockduck had a question. If you happen to know if we've talked about Nashville numbers
Nashville
and
numbers.
that system, I think that's a guitar specific
Yeah.
situation. Maybe I might, Elisa, hold on to that question. That
Yeah,
might be a good one for a Sam Schwartz type fella.
Yeah,
or
let's.
person. Yeah,
I'm making a note right now because I'm not.
we're gonna look into it.
Yeah, that's something I should know.
And I had a couple questions. So with the older notation, since you're working with just I assume you're working with as simple of the melody as you can get with still having it. Were the performers at that time expected, especially if they were soloists, were they expected to add their own flourishes, add their own sort of improvisation within that, or at that time are you still mostly just reading what's written?
It depends on the kind of music. So like with the stuff where it was like the circular music, like good luck improvising. But with something like Alphabetto, like it's pretty much understood that because you were just strumming chords, you were meant to fill in between those chords if you were a proficient guitarist. And that was guitar tablature in its day. That wasn't like lutes or mandolins or anything. That was specifically for like the Spanish guitar in that time. Right. So yeah, if you were strumming those, you'd fill in the gaps, and hopefully some of them you'll see where like it's for like a lot of times this music was for like amateur players, and like amateurs taken on this sort of like pejorative like
only an amateur
now. It's like, oh yeah, I was like, this is so amateur. But like back in the day, and hopefully we can bring this back again, because like presumably we're all doing this because we like music.
Even if you're not getting paid gigs, you still enjoy music. You still enjoy the process of playing and learning music. Like which is valid. Which is
like
a fun
amateur
way to spend your time.
Literally comes from the word to love. So like you're doing this because you love it. Like you're not doing it because you feel obligated. Like you're doing this because it's fun and you like it. So like I hope amateur gets a better reputation again.
Let's bring amateur back.
Let's bring amateur back.
All right.
Put it on a t-shirt. Bring amateur back.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. It is always a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for putting this together. Thank you all for the questions. Right now, it is about 1:15 till, so we are going to move straight into our first performance. This is my Noah 16, Noah Morgan, who was on the stream a few months ago. He is back with a couple of acoustic tunes, which he will introduce himself. After his first song, we're going to hear from our own Greg Studley as he talks about playing within triads. So we're going to hit that. But right before, once more, I want to say thank you very much for joining us, Margaret Jones. We'll see you very soon.
Take care.
Thank you. And here is my Noah 16.
Hey everyone, Noah Morgan here, or my Noah 16 as some of you know me. I'm back here again on the Rocksmith stream to play 2 more acoustic songs for you guys. First, I'm going to be playing Jeff Buckley's Last Goodbye, and the second song we'll be playing is Banana Pancakes by Jack Johnson. Both these songs I love, both these artists very much. I love both these songs. Jeff Buckley's Grace is one of the best albums I've ever listened to. Jack Johnson has been a favorite of mine for many years also, and with Rocksmith I got to learn both of them luckily. And with Last Goodbye, I love the chord progression is so beautiful. That song just gives me chills every time I listen to it. That entire album just gives me chills. And then with Jack Johnson, it's a lot of slapping, and I tried to do that, but I hurt myself trying to do that, so I'm going to use a pick on that. And they're just both great songs. I recommend both of them. And I want to thank Rocksmith again for giving me another opportunity to play 2 more acoustic songs for you guys. So first we're going to be doing Jeff Buckley, and then we're going to be doing Jack Johnson. So thank you all for watching, and stick around for Banana Pancakes after this.
everybody, Greg Studley here. Today I was thinking, instead of talking about lead guitar stuff, we could have a little bit of time to talk about some rhythm guitar. We spent a lot of time talking about how we can make our lead chops better, playing scales, arpeggios, bending, whatever. But we don't really spend that much time on rhythm. But rhythm's a key part of being able to be a really solid player. So a lot of times when we're taking rhythm guitar concepts in mind, we're really thinking about, okay, what is our chord progression, how we're going to play it. So what if we took the simplest chord progression and said, okay, I want you to just work on playing something like a G, a C, and a D. And for pretty much everybody, they're going to go, sure, that's piece of cake, it's fine. G chord, C chord, D, back to a G. Now you might also say, okay, well, I could play it as open chords, but I could also play it as bar chords. I'm familiar enough with bar chords, so great. Now what if I asked, well, could you take those same chords and can you make them so they constantly move upward? And all of a sudden that makes you think a little differently, like, wait, you not only want me to play these chords, but you want me to choose what direction they're moving in. And that is the point when triads become really useful. So triads are 3-note chords. All major chords and minor chords are essentially triads. They have 3 notes. Sometimes the way we play them has those notes repeating, and sometimes we can just play them as those 3 notes. Now, in the examples I just did, there's lots of repeated notes. In open chords, you're repeating at least 1 note an additional time. Bar chords the same way. And that sometimes limits what you can do with them because you're playing so many notes. But if you play smaller triad voicings, what you can do is you can actually start to manipulate them in a way where you can choose the direction they're going because there's less notes to move. So what you can do is you could take something like a G chord, this bar-shaped G, and just play the highest 3 notes. Now you're playing a G triad. Okay, now there's a few different triad shapes that you can play. We'll just talk about like the top 3 strings. So this is one of them where you're barring over your first 2 strings with your first finger here, and then your second finger would play on the next fret. And remember, these are all movable shapes, so these can go anywhere you need them to. Another triad shape looks very much like the D chord, with just playing the 3 strings rather than also including the open D. And this is also a movable shape, because you're moving all the notes the same amount. The other triad shape that you can use for major chords on the top 3 strings is this one. And this one actually comes from an A chord. It's like taking the A chord, isolating the highest 3 strings, and then making it into a movable shape. And so this one is best played using, I would say, finger 1, finger 3, and finger 4. So 3 triad shapes to work with. Now that was actually the same chord progression I had done before. This being a G chord, C chord, D, and back to G. Now the interesting thing is when you only have this many notes, you can really hear, okay, it moves up to the C, then it moves down to the D, and back up to the G. So you've actually got some really clear direction here. Now, the great thing about it is you don't have to use this directional movement anymore. You could say, well, hey, what if I want the C to go up to the D instead of going down? Well, there's your G, there's your C. Now you've gone up to a D by moving the C up by 2 frets, and now you can go back to the G. Okay, well now we went up from C to D, but what if we wanted the D to go up to the G at the end now? Well, still have your G to start, your C, your D, and now, by using the shape of D up here, you've got a G chord. So even just by that much, we've got a few different options to work with. If you were to play through the chord progression, you can make it move in different ways. So these 3 triad shapes, just 3 of them, can actually give you a lot of options around the neck. Now, This all works well for major chords, but there's also triad shapes for minor chords. There's also triad shapes that can go on other strings. So I'm just going to show you a little example of how versatile this can make your rhythm guitar playing, and how you can see that it really controls what you're going to sound like, more so than using the standard open chord or bar chord shapes. So I'm going to take the same exact chord progression, so it's all just major chords right now, but I'm going to move it all around the neck as I'm playing, keeping the rhythm the same, but making it so directionally my notes are going higher and lower with the chords. All the way up, you can take it. You could go all the way up the neck this way if you wanted to. The cool thing is, once you get another string worth of triads in your hands, you can just do it on another string. Same kind of feel, lower set of strings, but you still get that directional movement. So think about this when you're coming up with rhythm guitar parts, or when you're playing them. See, like, hey, is this person playing a full chord, or are they just playing a smaller, like, triad version of the chord? And when you're writing your own stuff, you can really start thinking about, okay, this is the chord progression I want, but what do I want it to actually sound like? Do I want it to move upward, move downward, kind of all be contained in a small space, or to move around? All of this is going to determine what your parts sound like. It's not just the chord progression, it's also how you choose to play it. So check out different triad shapes. Majors and minors are going to be the key to really getting yourself through almost all songs that you're going to work with. Hope this helps out. Keep on practicing.
Hello and welcome back to a live portion of today's Rocksmith Developer Stream. I remain your host and community developer on Rocksmith, Douglas Lilly. Glad to have you here. Thank you very much to Greg. Thank you to Noah Morgan, who we're going to hear from again in just a moment. Right now, as mentioned earlier, the song pack giveaways. Today I'm kind of sticking with the acoustic theme, and we're going to give away 5 copies of the Joni Mitchell song pack for Steam. Since we don't have a good way to message people with a raffle, we're just going to have UB Jurassic drop those codes into chat. So these are going to be first come, first served. If you grab them and you enter them into Steam, you will be able to redeem them. I'm saying this slowly so that if anybody needs to right now, they can get their Steam account open and ready to activate some keys. So we're going to do 5 copies of the Joni Mitchell song pack on Steam. That song pack includes A Case of You, Big Yellow Taxi, and Both Sides Now. And UB Jurassic will be dropping those 5 codes into the chat right about now. Yeah, and we're gonna have one more performance from Noah Morgan. Noah, when he sent these were he performed them just using microphone mode, just playing his acoustic guitar, being picked up there, and we sort of added the music in the background after the fact because you couldn't really hear it on his recording. That was expected. That's what we did. So hopefully it matches up well enough. Thank you. And here is Noah Morgan, who you can find on Twitter and YouTube at mynoah16 if you want to give him a follow on either or both of those platforms. Here, once more, is Noah Morgan.
Can't you see that it's just raining? There ain't no need to go outside. But baby, you hardly even know when I try to show you. The song is meant to keep you doing what you're supposed to. Waking up too early, maybe we could sleep. Make you banana pancakes, pretend like it's the weekend night. Pretend it all the time. Can't you see that it's just raining? There ain't no need to go outside. But just maybe like a ukulele, mama made a baby. Really don't mind the practice, cause you're my little lady. Lady, lady, love me, cause I love to lay you lazy. We could close the curtains, pretend like there's no world outside. We could pretend it all the time. And can't you see that it's just raining? There ain't no need to go outside. Ain't no need, ain't no need. Can't you see, can't you see? Rain all day, night and night. But the telephone singing, ringing, it's too early, don't pick it up. We don't need to, we got everything we need right here, and everything we need is enough. Just so easy when the whole world fits inside of your arms. Do we really need to pay attention to the alarm? Wake up slow, wake up slow. But baby, you hardly even know when I try to show you. The song is meant to keep you doing what you're supposed to. Waking up too early, maybe we could sleep. Make you banana pancakes, pretend like it's the weekend night. And we could pretend it all the time. And can't you see that it's just raining? There ain't no need to go outside. Ain't no need, ain't no need. Rain all day and I really, really, really. Can't you see, can't you see? Wake up slow.
And welcome back to the Rocksmith Developer Stream. I have been your host and community developer, Douglas Silly. Thanks very much to Noah Morgan. Once again, that's my Noah16 on YouTube and Twitter. Also, thank you to Greg Studley for showing us some tips on triads. Thank you especially to Dr. Margaret Jones for that lovely conversation about the history of tablature. Thank you to everyone here, everyone who came over from Twitch, everyone who's joining us on YouTube for maybe the first or second time. Dan Emmerich on the board and in the chat. Thank you to Brian Turner at UB Jurassic for answering questions, giving away some song packs, and yeah. We will see you in a couple weeks. I will not be here. We will have a guest host, which will be UB Jurassic himself. He will be taking over this spot in a couple weeks. So we would look forward to seeing you there. Goodbye.